Admiral Jake Miller walked slowly through the command center of the massive Earth warship called the UED Titan. His boots echoed against the metal floor as he stared at the glowing screen in front of him. 3 hours ago, a message had arrived from deep space that would change everything. The message wasn't meant for humans at first, but somehow it had reached them anyway. The transmission came from something called the Kithra Republic. Miller had never heard of them before, but the desperation in their voices was clear even through the alien language translators. These weren't warriors or conquerors asking for help. They were families, children, entire civilizations running for their lives from something much worse than them. Captain Beth Taylor stood next to Miller, her fingers dancing across the control panel. She was his best tactical officer, someone who could read a battle situation faster than anyone else in the fleet. The holographic display above them showed a three-dimensional map of distant star systems, and what Miller saw there made his stomach turn cold. Entire planets were on fire. Not just cities or military bases, but whole worlds burning from space. Tiny dots on the screen represented refugee ships packed with alien families trying to escape the destruction. Behind them, larger red dots showed the enemy fleet giving chase like wolves hunting deer. "Sir, our intelligence computers have been working on this for hours," Taylor said, pointing to different areas of the map. "The enemy calls themselves the Vazaki Horde. They have over 300 warships, and they've been destroying everything in their path for 6 weeks straight. They don't just conquer planets. They completely wipe out every living thing they find." Miller rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of what he was seeing. The Kithra Republic wasn't just some distant alien government. It was 7 different species who had somehow learned to live together peacefully. They built trade routes instead of weapons. They shared knowledge instead of hoarding it. And now they were all going to die unless someone helped them. The worst part was that the Kithra had sent their desperate plea to every major civilization in the galaxy. Earth's listening posts had intercepted dozens of the same message being broadcast to different star systems. The Kithra were begging anyone, anywhere, to come save them. But every single alien government had refused to help. Miller understood why. Throughout the galaxy, humans had a reputation that preceded them everywhere they went. Other species called them Deathworlders, and not as a compliment. They believed that Earth was such a dangerous, hostile planet that it had created a race of violent monsters. Most alien civilizations went out of their way to avoid contact with humans, treating Earth like a quarantine zone for dangerous predators. The irony wasn't lost on Miller. These peaceful aliens were dying because no one wanted to help them, while the savage humans were the only ones willing to answer their call. He had read the intelligence reports about how other species viewed humanity. They thought humans solved every problem with violence, that they were barely controlled barbarians who had somehow stumbled into space travel. "Signal the entire fleet," Miller said, his voice carrying across the command center. Every officer and crew member stopped what they were doing to listen. "All ships begin immediate preparation for combat deployment. Check every weapon system, every shield generator, every single piece of equipment. We're about to jump into the biggest fight any of us have ever seen." Lieutenant Commander Tom Rodriguez, Miller's second-in-command, began coordinating with the other ships in their massive fleet. 12 enormous dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying entire enemy fleets by themselves. 40 smaller but deadly destroyers that could move fast and hit hard. Supply ships, medical vessels, and transport craft carrying 50,000 Marines trained for the most dangerous combat situations imaginable. As Miller watched his crew prepare for battle, he couldn't help but think about what this mission really meant. The galaxy had painted humans as monsters, but here they were, about to risk everything to save complete strangers. Maybe it was time to show the universe what Deathworlders really fought for. Not conquest, not territory, not resources, but for people who couldn't protect themselves. The stars began to shift and blur as the human fleet prepared to jump across vast distances of space, heading toward a battle that would determine the fate of millions of innocent lives. The moment the human fleet materialized from hyperspace, every crew member could see they had arrived in the middle of a nightmare. Space itself seemed to be on fire. 3 entire planets hung in the darkness with orange flames spreading across their surfaces like deadly infection. The glow from burning cities was so bright it could be seen from orbit. Captain Lisa Wong gripped the command chair of her destroyer, the Bulldog, as the tactical displays lit up with dozens of red warning signals. Everywhere she looked, massive alien warships were chasing down much smaller vessels packed with families trying to escape. The enemy ships were enormous and black, covered in spikes and sharp edges designed to look as terrifying as possible. "Captain, I'm reading 47 civilian transports under attack," her weapons officer reported, his voice tight with urgency. "The enemy is herding them like cattle, picking them off one by one." Wong watched the display as a Vazaki cruiser fired its main guns at a refugee ship barely 1/10 its size. The civilian vessel's shields flickered and died, leaving thousands of alien families completely defenseless. She had seen enough. "All weapons, target that Vazaki cruiser immediately," she ordered, pointing at the largest enemy ship on the screen. "Full power to the main batteries. These bullies are about to learn what happens when they pick on someone their own size." The Bulldog's weapons erupted in brilliant streams of energy that crossed the void in seconds. The first human shots to be fired in this battle struck the Vazaki cruiser dead center, and the results were shocking. The massive enemy ship, which had been built more for show than actual fighting, simply crumpled under the assault like aluminum foil. Its hull cracked open and atmosphere vented into space as secondary explosions ripped through its interior. The other Vazaki ships immediately stopped chasing refugees and turned their attention to this new threat. Wong smiled grimly as she watched 5 enemy vessels change course to attack her single destroyer. They had no idea what they were getting into. "Take us in fast and low," she commanded her pilot. "Use the debris field from that burning orbital platform as cover. Let's show these predators how Deathworlders really fight." The Bulldog dove toward the burning remains of what had once been a space station, moving with an aggressiveness that stunned everyone watching. Enemy plasma bolts lit up the space around them, but Wong's ship danced between the attacks like it was performing some deadly ballet. Every time the Vazaki thought they had her cornered, the human destroyer would twist away at impossible angles, using pieces of wreckage as shields while returning devastating fire. On the refugee ships, thousands of Kithra civilians pressed their faces to the windows, watching something they had never imagined possible. The humans weren't just fighting the Vazaki ships. They were positioning themselves between the predators and their prey, using their own vessels as shields to protect complete strangers. Every human attack was carefully aimed to destroy military targets while making sure no stray shots could hit civilian vessels. This wasn't the mindless violence the galaxy had told them to expect from Deathworlders. This was controlled fury with a purpose. Meanwhile, Major Mike Thompson was leading the most dangerous part of the operation. His assault pods had launched from the main fleet and were heading directly toward a Vazaki ship that had taken Kithra prisoners. Intelligence reported that over 2,000 alien civilians were being held in the cargo holds of that vessel, waiting to be sold as slaves or worse. "Remember, we go in fast and we go in hard," Thompson told his Marines over the comm system. "But we don't hurt anyone who isn't shooting at us. These prisoners have been through enough already." The assault pods crashed through the Vazaki ship's hull like bullets punching through paper. Thompson and his men poured into the corridors of the enemy vessel, and what happened next would become legend throughout the galaxy. The Vazaki warriors inside had never faced humans in close combat before. They had no idea that these supposedly primitive Deathworlders had trained their entire lives to fight in the most dangerous environments imaginable. The ship's own hazardous atmosphere, meant to keep prisoners weak and afraid, had no effect on the Marines. They moved through the toxic air and crushing gravity like it was nothing, their advanced armor adapting to conditions that would have killed most other species in minutes. To the Vazaki defenders, these humans seemed like unstoppable ghosts, appearing from nowhere and striking with deadly precision before vanishing back into the maze of corridors. Within 2 hours, Thompson's team had secured all the prisoners and neutralized every enemy soldier on the ship without harming a single civilian. The rescued Kithra could barely believe what they had witnessed. These weren't savage monsters. These were professional soldiers who risked their lives to save people they had never met. By the end of the first engagement, the immediate threat to the refugee convoy had been eliminated. 43 Vazaki ships had been destroyed or captured, while not a single civilian transport had been lost. But Admiral Miller knew this victory was just the beginning of a much larger war. Colonel David Clark stood in the cramped briefing room of the assault transport, staring at the holographic display that showed the most hostile planet he had ever seen. Thyros Prime had once been the beautiful capital world of the Kithra Republic, home to billions of peaceful aliens who had built magnificent crystal cities that sparkled like jewels from orbit. Now it looked like a vision of hell itself. The Vazaki occupation had been deliberately brutal. They had poisoned the atmosphere with toxic chemicals, turning the air itself into a weapon. Massive storms of acid rain swept across the planet's surface, dissolving anything they touched. The gravity generators that had once made the world comfortable for its inhabitants had been cranked up to crushing levels that would flatten most species in minutes. Intelligence reports show 50,000 Kithra civilians still alive down there, Clark told his Marines, his voice grim but determined. They're hiding in underground shelters, but those won't protect them much longer. The Vazaki are using the planet's own environment as a prison. They figure no rescue force could possibly operate in those conditions. Sergeant Amy Foster, one of Clark's most experienced soldiers, studied the atmospheric readings on her datapad. The numbers were staggering. Radiation levels that would cook most aliens alive within an hour. Air so poisonous that a single breath without protection would dissolve lung tissue. Gravity so intense that walking would be like carrying 3 other people on your back. "Sir, this place makes our worst training environments look like vacation spots," Foster said, but there was no fear in her voice. "Good thing we're not most species." Clark smiled grimly. Every human marine had trained since childhood on planets and stations designed to prepare them for exactly these kinds of impossible conditions. Earth itself had taught humanity to adapt to hostile environments, and human military training had pushed that ability to its absolute limits. What looked like certain death to other species was just another day at the office for these soldiers. "Drop pods launching in 30 seconds, Foster announced over the comm system. "Remember everyone, we're not here to conquer territory or fight a war. We're here to save innocent lives. Every civilian we rescue is a victory." The assault pods detached from the transport ship and plunged through the planet's toxic atmosphere like meteors. Acid rain hammered against their hulls while radioactive lightning storms tried to fry their electronics. Any other species would have died during the descent, but human technology had been designed by people who came from a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Clark's pod hit the ground with tremendous force, the impact crater glowing red-hot from the atmospheric entry. His armor's systems immediately began adapting to the hellish conditions outside. The toxic air was filtered and cleaned. The crushing gravity was compensated for by powered assist systems. The deadly radiation was absorbed and converted into additional power for his equipment. As he stepped out onto the surface of Thyros Prime, Clark could see why the Vazaki thought this planet was the perfect prison. The landscape looked like something from humanity's worst nightmares. Rivers of acid flowed between mountains of jagged rock. The sky was a sickly green color, filled with clouds that rained poison. In the distance, the remains of beautiful alien cities were slowly being dissolved by the contaminated atmosphere. But Clark and his Marines moved through this nightmare like they belonged there. Their armor allowed them to operate in conditions that hospitalized Kithra soldiers with just minutes of exposure. They had trained for this their entire careers, learning to fight and survive in environments where other species couldn't even exist. The first civilian shelter was located 3 miles from the landing zone, buried deep underground where the Kithra had hoped to wait out the occupation. Clark's team moved through the toxic wasteland with practiced efficiency, their equipment automatically mapping safe evacuation routes while they searched for survivors. The Vazaki defenders scattered throughout the area couldn't understand what they were seeing. These humans were operating in an environment that was supposed to be completely lethal, moving through the poison landscape like it was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. When Foster's squad located and breached the main Vazaki command post, the alien officers inside took one look at the armored figures walking through their toxic defenses and immediately threw down their weapons. "We surrender," their commander screamed in his translated voice. "Don't let the Deathworld demons near us." The rescue operation continued for 18 hours. Clark's Marines methodically located every civilian shelter, established safe evacuation corridors, and transported the survivors to waiting ships in orbit. The Kithara civilians could barely believe what they were witnessing. These humans were risking their lives in conditions that would kill most species instantly, all to save people they had never met. Extraction complete, Clark finally reported to Admiral Miller as the last transport lifted off from the planet's surface. "All 50,000 civilians safely aboard our ships. 0 casualties among the rescued population." But the celebration was short-lived. Within hours, the main Vazaki fleet commander broadcast a message that reached every corner of the galaxy. His species had taken over 2 million Kithara prisoners from other worlds, and now he was threatening to execute them all in the most horrific ways imaginable unless the humans immediately withdrew from the conflict. Admiral Miller's response became legendary throughout known space. His voice was calm and controlled, but every word carried the weight of absolute determination. "We don't negotiate with genocidal monsters," he said simply. "We end them." The Corax Nebula stretched across space like a massive cloud of death, glowing with colors that no living being should ever see up close. Captain Steve Wilson stood on the bridge of his destroyer, watching the swirling mass of radiation and cosmic fire that had claimed hundreds of ships over the centuries. Most species in the galaxy considered it a graveyard, a place where even the most advanced technology would fail within hours. "Sir, the Vazaki fleet is maintaining pursuit," his tactical officer reported. 37 ships following us directly into the nebula. "They seem confident we've trapped ourselves." Wilson smiled coldly. The Vazaki had no idea what they were flying into. Human ships had been designed and built by engineers who understood that space itself was trying to kill anyone brave enough to venture into it. Every circuit, every piece of equipment, every single component had been hardened against the worst conditions the universe could throw at them. Solar flares, cosmic radiation, electromagnetic storms that could scramble most alien technology in seconds, human vessels had been built to survive it all. "Take us deeper into the nebula," Wilson commanded. "Let's show these hunters what it feels like to become the prey." The human squadron disappeared into the swirling chaos of the Corax Nebula like ghosts vanishing into fog. Behind them, the Vazaki fleet followed confidently, their commanders certain they were about to corner and destroy these troublesome Deathworlders once and for all. The radiation levels inside the nebula would cripple human technology just like it did everyone else's. At least, that's what they believed. They were completely wrong. Wilson's destroyers moved through the deadly environment like they belonged there. Their hulls absorbed the radiation and converted it into additional power for their weapons systems. Their sensors, designed to work in the electromagnetic chaos around Earth's sun, tracked enemy movements with perfect clarity while the Vazaki ships flew blind through the cosmic storm. The first Vazaki cruiser died without ever seeing what killed it. Wilson's ship emerged from the nebula's depths like a predator striking from the darkness, unleashing a devastating barrage before disappearing back into the radioactive fog. The enemy vessel split in half, its crew never understanding how humans could operate in conditions that were frying their own electronics. "Target acquired," Wilson announced as his squadron positioned themselves for another strike. "Remember, we hit them fast and hard, then vanish before they can respond. Use the nebula as our shield and our weapon." What followed was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare that would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for generations. The human ships danced through the deadly environment like deadly spirits, appearing from nowhere to strike critical targets before melting back into the cosmic storm. Every attack was perfectly coordinated, designed to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure to enemy fire. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Katie Davis led the most dangerous mission of the entire operation. Intelligence had located the Vazaki flagship hiding in what its crew thought was the safest part of the nebula. Davis and her Marines launched their assault pods directly into the heart of the radiation storm, their armor protecting them from energy levels that would have killed most species instantly. The boarding action that followed changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about human warfare. Davis's Marines moved through the enemy ship's corridors with terrifying efficiency, their training and equipment allowing them to adapt to the vessel's hostile environment in seconds. But what shocked the Vazaki defenders wasn't the humans' skill in combat, it was their restraint. Every human attack was precisely targeted at military personnel and equipment. When Vazaki soldiers surrendered, they were immediately taken prisoner and given medical treatment. When enemy crew members were wounded, human medics rushed to save their lives alongside their own casualties. The Marines fought with controlled fury that devastated the enemy fleet while showing mercy that the Vazaki species had never experienced in their entire history. The contradiction broke the enemy psychologically. These were supposed to be savage monsters, barely controlled beasts from a nightmare world. Instead, the Vazaki found themselves facing professional soldiers who fought with deadly precision while following rules of engagement that protected non-combatants and treated prisoners humanely. On the Kithra refugee ships scattered throughout the system, alien civilians watched the battle through long-range sensors and recorded everything they saw. The footage spread across the galaxy's communication networks within hours. Billions of beings who had been taught to fear humans as violent savages watched in amazement as the Deathworlders risked their lives repeatedly to save complete strangers. Admiral Miller coordinated the entire operation from the bridge of the UED Titan, watching his forces systematically dismantle an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. But his orders remained consistent throughout the battle. All units, maintain formation and discipline, he commanded. Remember what we're fighting for here. This isn't about conquest or revenge. This is about protection. We're not here to become the new monsters of the galaxy. We're here to stop the ones that already exist. The battle raged for 6 hours, and when it was over, the Vazaki fleet had been completely destroyed or captured. But the survivors, both enemy and allied, carried away something far more important than military victory. They had witnessed humanity's true nature, and it was nothing like what the galaxy had been told to expect. The Vazaki, facing their first real defeat in generations, were forced to confront the reality that their reign of terror was coming to an end. In their desperation, they began planning one final, suicidal assault that would force the galaxy to remember why they had been feared for so long. Admiral Miller watched the tactical display with growing horror as every remaining Vazaki ship in the galaxy suddenly changed course. They weren't retreating or regrouping for another strategic attack. Instead, every single enemy vessel was heading directly toward the massive convoy of Kithra refugee ships that contained over 2 million innocent civilians. The Vazaki had finally realized they couldn't win this war through conventional means. Their fleet was broken, their reputation as unstoppable conquerors was shattered, and their entire way of life was collapsing around them. But they could still inflict one final, devastating blow that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. If they couldn't rule through fear anymore, they would at least make sure their enemies paid the highest possible price for their victory. "Sir, enemy fleet trajectory confirmed," reported his tactical officer, her voice tight with urgency. 143 Vazaki ships on direct intercept course with the refugee convoy. At their current speed, they'll reach the civilians in 12 minutes. Miller's mind raced through the possibilities. The refugee ships were massive but slow, packed with families who had already lost everything except their lives. They couldn't outrun the attacking fleet, and they had no weapons to defend themselves. The only thing standing between 2 million innocent beings and certain death was the human fleet. "All ships, emergency intercept course," Miller commanded, his voice carrying across every communication channel in the fleet. "Maximum speed, all power to engines. Whatever this costs us, those civilians are not going to die today." Throughout the human fleet, captains and crew members understood exactly what they were being asked to do. The Vazaki weren't planning to board the refugee ships or take prisoners. This was a pure suicide attack designed to cause maximum destruction before the enemy fleet was completely eliminated. Stopping it would require human ships to physically place themselves between the attackers and their targets, using their own hulls as shields. Captain Ryan Murphy stood on the bridge of his destroyer, the Phoenix, watching as his ship accelerated toward the incoming enemy formation. His crew worked with deadly efficiency around him, preparing weapons and shields for the impact they all knew was coming. Murphy had served in the human fleet for 15 years, but he had never faced a situation quite like this one. "Captain, we're on direct collision course with the lead Vazaki cruiser," his helmsman reported. "Impact in 45 seconds. Murphy nodded calmly, opening a channel to his crew. "This is your captain speaking. In less than a minute, we're going to ram that enemy ship to prevent it from reaching those refugee families. Every one of you volunteered to serve in this fleet knowing that someday we might be asked to make the ultimate sacrifice. That day is today. I want you to know it has been my honor to serve alongside the finest crew in the galaxy." The Phoenix struck the Vazaki cruiser head-on at full combat speed. The impact was visible from hundreds of thousands of miles away, a brilliant flash of light as two warships destroyed each other in seconds. Murphy's last transmission was heard across every human vessel in the fleet, his voice steady and calm even as his ship broke apart around him. "Control, this is Phoenix. Mission accomplished. Tell my family back home that I died protecting people who needed protection. Tell them that's what humans do." The battle that followed was brutal beyond description, but it lasted only 18 minutes from beginning to end. 3 human destroyers were completely destroyed, along with 2 cruisers that had sustained critical damage while ramming enemy vessels. 8,000 human crew members died in those 18 minutes, but their sacrifice ensured that every single refugee ship survived the attack intact. When the last Vazaki vessel was destroyed, an eerie quiet settled over the battlefield. The refugee convoy continued its slow journey toward safety, while human rescue ships searched the debris for any survivors from their own lost vessels. The cost had been terrible, but 2 million Kithra civilians were alive because humans had been willing to die for complete strangers. In the days that followed, something happened that no one in the galaxy had expected. The Kithra Republic, speaking for all 7 species in their alliance, formally requested that humanity join the Galactic Council. Not as junior members or probationary participants, but as full partners with the title of Protector Species. It was an honor that had never been offered to any civilization before. Admiral Miller's response was broadcast across every inhabited system in known space. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of humanity's new role in the galaxy. "We are human," he said, standing on the bridge of the UED Titan surrounded by the flags of every nation on Earth. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day of our existence, and we not only survived, we learned something important. We learned how to protect others. This galaxy is our home now, and we will defend it the same way we defended our birth planet, with everything we have, including our lives if necessary." The human fleet established permanent bases throughout Kithra space, but not as occupying forces. They came as guardians, protectors who had proven they would sacrifice everything to keep innocent people safe. The galaxy's opinion of the so-called Deathworlders had changed forever. Humans were no longer seen as savage monsters from a nightmare world. Instead, they had become the finest example of what intelligent life could accomplish when it chose to protect rather than destroy. The age of human isolation was finally over. The age of human guardianship had begun, and the galaxy was safer because of it.